Working Cows Podcast, episode 366. This episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Conry, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the Understanding Ag Studios. And this episode is brought to you by Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship. Until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. Very excited to be joined today by James Coffelt. James is a seed stock producer in Ohio Land and Cattle Company. And he is also a guy who just thinks differently about ranching and looks at all of the various surface areas entrusted to him and sees opportunities to make an income above ground, below ground. The water that he has there in Ohio, also a source of income. And so we're going to talk to him about just kind of all of these things that he's got going on and how he looks at it, how he thinks about it, how he thinks about the opportunities that exist. So James, thanks for joining me today on the Working Cows Podcast.
Thank you.
I'm always interested to talk to people who are different in a different context than I am. I find myself here in western South Dakota, kind of semi-arid environment, high plains, steppe, sagebrush, and some of those things. And so I think that our context really influences the way we think. And so could you tell me a little bit about your context and where you find yourself in the world?
We're in southeast Ohio, which was this particular county, interestingly, had the largest density of sheep in the country around the 1900s. In the 1940s, had the highest number of millionaires per capita in the state. It was because if you own land, that land had coal, and that coal made you a millionaire. The coal companies then gathered together the smaller farmers, most of which were 80 acres, 160 acre type stuff, and created large tracts of land, which became available once they were mined and reclaimed to ranchers. So there's really a very high density of cattle now in southeast Ohio. The largest ranch is 22,000 acres, about 3,000 head of cattle. We're second at 8,500 acres and 1,000 or so head. And, just fairly large tracts that are very productive with high rainfall, moderate summers, moderate winters.
So your personal context, how did you get to be doing what you're doing right now?
Well, I had a company that put point-of-sale systems in restaurants and schools about 20 years and sold it, and concurrently had bought a large tract of land for initially just for hunting. And a lot of it was open, so we put cattle on it, and that was 25 years ago. And Learned what we were doing two ways: by reading, studying seminars, and doing a lot of things wrong initially.
Who were some of those influences that you were reading and some of the seminars that you were going to?
Zeetzman
Mm.
is a very big influence. Uh, Pine Bank, Gavin Falloon from New Zealand. We follow Oldie carefully. WYE
Mm.
carefully. And our herd today is made up really of Pine Bank is the largest influence, Oldie's probably second, Y third. And our herd is a mixture of those three.
Sure. Yeah, this is a shout out to David Frank Paul, because he's probably the guy that's told me or shared with me more of those names that you just dropped in personal conversation than anybody else. And so he's the reason I know who you're talking about when you mention Y and Pine Bank and Oldie and some of those guys. So basically what you're talking about is low input Angus genetics that, offer the ability to finish on grass. Is that part of the motivation?
It's year-round grass here. We don't feed hay at all, and that's the beauty of being close to the 38th parallel. That's about the ideal place to do it. And if you get much farther north, you can't. Then you've got to feed something for some period, and but even there, the right genetics and management model will permit you to reduce that feeding period and feeding costs, frankly.
Sure. And would you say that also farther south of there, you get into more of a warm season grass regime that makes it kind of difficult as well? Would you agree with that?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what you have is a good mix of cool and warm season grasses, warm seasons being good, of course, in the warm season, cool seasons being good for a longer, wider period of time. And that allows you to finish on grass.
Yes. And then the low input cattle model is also what permits you to performance cattle could not go year round on grass. One of the four branches that we watch carefully, and just from an EPD perspective or numbers, we want calving ease, very moderate growth, that is weaning weights below 40. We want milk below 20. The average in the Angus breed is double that. And we want a dollar EN, which is above 15. That's a measure of efficiency, with the idea that the first thing a cow is going to do is survive. Second thing she does is put on fat. Once she has some fat that interacts with hormones, now she's productive and gets through the winter on less and breeds back easier.
How long has the dollar EN EPD been around? I became aware of it fairly recently, but
no, it's not new.
okay.
Yeah, it's 25 years for sure.
Wow. But we've been emphasizing everything else, right? Carcass merits, weaning weights, all these other things instead of that.
Yes, the industry is focused on everything that prevents low input year-round grazing, and makes it harder on breeding back. Without inputs, feed, so on.
Right. Yeah. And you mentioned Johann Zeetzman. I'm a lurker in the Johann Zeetzman texting group.
Very good.
Yeah. So I understand that, and I appreciate some of the things that he says regularly. Fertility is a function of fleshing ability, right? It's the ability for that animal to cycle well is a function of her ability to stay fat, basically.
That is very well said. And they start fleshing as soon as their survival requirements are met. And we want those survival requirements as low as possible. And the weaning weight EPD combined with the milk EPD is what makes up that efficiency.
Sure.
From a number standpoint.
Right. Right. And the opposite end of that is the higher frame score animals require more for survival.
Yes.
We've had people say things like it takes 3 times as much energy, I think, to put on a pound of fat as it does to grow to grow bone mass, basically.
The more moderate the animal, the higher the relative intake. That is, the more they eat relative to what they weigh. A mouse probably eats its body weight every day. An elephant eats just a small fraction of its body weight.
Mm. Yeah, very good. So relate that to profitability, to the way that you actually capture value from those animals who are able to do all that.
Two thoughts. One is assume the sale barn is working closely with the packers, and if all we're doing is producing cattle, taking it to the sale barn, the packers are bidding on it, that's break even all day, and it's just a hobby. There's got to be something else. It's got to be grass finished, organic, breeding stock, selling bulls, and there's got to be some type of premium to charge. Now, in addition to that, the average cow costs in the Angus world, and probably the cattle world for that matter, are about $800 a year. So they're spitting out a calf and they're starting out $800 in costs. And this year, everything's great, but that's not the norm. Our cow costs, on the other hand, are $293, so we've got a $500 cost advantage, and that is no shots, no worming, no hay, no feed, only minerals, and genetics that can thrive in that environment. With hard culling, that is every open leaves, once the herd is at the carrying capacity of the forage resources we have, then you can get more picky and call even harder. But we don't call if they're just a little late. We have a 60-day calving window, and we tag all the calves, weigh them, because our herd is registered. But we stop checking calves, or tagging calves, rather, once they're outside that 60-day window. So anything untagged we know was late, and have a record of the same. And then we can match them up later, so we know who's who. But initially, that's how we know.
Those animals that are outside the 60-day window become, the first candidates to leave. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, every herd has a top half and a bottom half. If they're late, they're in the bottom half. And when we're fully stocked, and stocking rate affects profitability more than any other factor, once we're fully stocked, then we can get picky with the lates. Yeah, one late calf will have as much value as 15 calves that were born on time and wean 30 pounds heavier.
Tell me what you mean by that.
Well, that if you didn't have that late calf, let me back up. You did have the late calf. It has value. That value equates to 15 other calves born on time that were 30 pounds heavier. So we want them both, actually.
I see. And how are you capturing that value?
Mostly, we sell a lot to people starting herds or growing herds as seed stock is a short answer.
Gotcha.
And bulls, and we get the steers out of here as quickly as possible, with the idea that the steers are eating grass that otherwise could go to a female that's going to grow and calve, where a steer's only going to grow, a cow's only going to calve and eat more than a young female.
And how are you selecting steers? At what age is it determined?
6 to 10 months, and it's driven a little bit by the buyers. That is, it's interesting. We've got a lot of Amish around here, and some will want to buy 200 and 300 pound calves, and we'll go find them. Now, we've got 4 different cow herds. The ranch is contiguous, but there's roads in between and so on, and on a rotational grazing system. We've got 4 groups, one of which is a seed stock group. And we would pick the steers out of the 3 groups, and then the bulls out of the seed stock group, which is the best group.
Sure. And how long have you been doing this? How long have you been at the actual seed stock side of this? Or you mentioned your early influences were Johann Zeitzman, and how long have you been doing that?
We've been in the cattle business 25 years, in the seed stock side, probably 15.
And how have you seen that bell curve tighten up over that time period?
Do you mean with our cattle?
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. What has been? Is it the culling that's made the difference?
The beauty of Pine Bank is there are about 80 generations into breeding a grass finished, low input, calving ease, a high efficiency type animal, moderate in size, moderate growth, and so on. Likewise, Oldie is about 40 generations plus or minus. Y is 70 some generations. So stacking those generations is key. And on that point, the biggest sellers of bulls, for the most part, rely on cooperators, and those cooperators turn over at about 20% a year. So it's impossible to stack generations. They're all nice people, and many of them my friends. Effectively, they're cherry picking the outliers, the most beautiful out of 1,000 plus bulls, and choosing 400 or 500 to sell. We're trying to develop a herd, not producing outliers. Larry Linhart of Shoshone wrote it, or was featured in an article years ago. And a buyer comes to buy a bull, and he said, "There are the bulls. They're all very similar in breeding. They're all very similar in numbers. Pick out what you want. It doesn't matter. And they're all the same price." And I like that concept.
Yeah, that is an interesting thing to think about. We're, talking here middle of April, kind of in bull sale season, and you can go to one almost every day of the week and within 100 miles of my house, and certainly watch multiple ones on the internet every day. And when you start to think about that, are these representative of the herd, or are they the outliers? That becomes interesting.
And let me add something too that it was stunning. We went to New Zealand, and we went through Pine Bank's whole herd and stayed at Gavin Floon's home. And he said something so interesting. They would on an 800 cow herd, calve them out, so you have 400 bull calves. They'd pick out the best ones, keep them, and put them back on their herd the following year. And then sell them all, with an option to buy them back, subject to how the progeny, the offspring, turned out. And of course, you would know that for 4 or 5 years, but they had the option to buy them back if it was an amazing group of calves. And he said we'd have 400 calves a year, or bull calves, to choose from. Every 10 years, they would buy one back. So do the math. 1 out of 4,000 was so stunning that they would buy it back. And now, if someone comes to my ranch or any other ranch or sale and think they're going to pick out that 1 in 4,000 as a yearling or 2-year-old, it's probably not even here. So that's a great lesson.
What drew you to the land? What brought you to that piece of land that you're on now?
Well, initially, it was very good hunting, and there was quite a bit of open. And when the coal companies reclaimed it, they seeded it with high percentage legumes, that is crown vetch, bird's foot trefoil, and so on. And a lot of locust, which actually is a legume also. And it was possible to buy large tracts of land, 1,000 acres at a time type stuff. You can't build a large ranch buying 20-acre parcels. Takes too long, and you can't connect them.
Yep. So you spent 20 or so years in the point of sale business for restaurants and schools. Then you purchase some hunting land. And how did you get from there to Johann Zeitzman and why and all these?
Well, that's a great question. That is, the hunting land, much of it was open. So the follow-up is, how do we reduce the taxes and so on with CAUV and making it agricultural. And the answer was put some cattle on it. Now you have cattle, and the first few years, we're doing everything you think you're supposed to do. And probably more than anything, I'm a businessman and start doing the math. And this is you can't make money doing it this way with a high level of feeding, hay all winter, shots, vets, and go down the list. You just can't, and then sell it at the sale barn. Right. It's a waste of time.
And it wasn't a scale issue at that point necessarily. It was a business structure.
A math issue.
Right. But I mean, as far as it wasn't that you didn't have enough animals, it was more of the fact that the business is structured in such a way that it makes it hard to make money.
Yes.
Right. And so then comes the low input genetics and those influences, and you start to see the path forward.
Yes. Well, everything initially, as you read the magazines, it's about performance. Mm-hmm. We want high milk, high weaning weights, high yearling weights, and it just costs too much to produce that. Now, having said that, there are different businesses. If we're producing offspring to win at the fair, and we have people that come here and say, we'd like a fair animal, I'd say, you'll lose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You don't want mine.
Yep. Yeah, and that is the thing that frustrates me the most about fairs is that the cow that is going to be there 10, 15 years from now without ever having missed is never going to win at the fair.
That's right.
That bothers me. It's like, I get it. We're playing different games. Let's have a terminal show and a maternal show, and just separate it, because they're two different things. The maternal cow isn't going to do well. I think she's capable of marbling. She's capable of producing our offspring that will marble well, because marbling is fat, and fat is fleshing ability and all those things that we've been talking about. But I think where they get dinged is on the carcass side of size is more the issue, as I understand it. Yield and some of those ratios that the packers are keeping a close eye on. Is that similar to your understanding?
Yes. It's just a totally different business. And another example, a dear friend of mine raises longhorns. He's got 5 of the 11 top horned animals in his breeding program in the world. Now some are dead, but he's produced 5 of the top 11. Now that's in the longhorn business, and they breed for outliers, trying to produce the biggest, most beautiful horns possible. Now then, they butcher when that animal, it's time to butcher it. Those horns are worth $1,000, or the skull and horns. The cape, because they're colorful, is probably worth another 500. Now they get started with the meat. So they're 1,500 on top before you even start. So that's a different business.
So you can grind it all into hamburger, mix a little fat with it, and it'll be just fine.
Yes. and Longhorns have a reputation, as you just said, for being very lean. But they've also bred in some pretty good carcass traits.
Right. Well, and that was the beef business. It wasn't the beef business originally. It was the hide business, right? I mean, when you talk about California in whatever century that was, 1500s through the 1800s, probably, maybe even later than that, it wasn't the beef business. It was the hide business. And so those things, it's not new. That's not new.
And also the ability to live on sparse resources. They were very low input, live on nothing.
Yep. Let's take a quick break and hear a word from our sponsor today, Farming Without the Bank. None of you are farming like you did 100 years ago. Why are you financing it like you did 100 years ago? The biggest part of your operation is the money that runs through your hands, and you let someone else control that. The bank gets the final say in what you get money for and when you pay it back. For many, this is a great relationship, until it's not. Farming Without the Bank shows you how you can take back control of your money so that you can make the bank plan B instead of plan A. This is done by you creating your own banking system you own and control. To learn more, tune into the Farming Without the Bank podcast and go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book. Once you've read the book, Mary Jo will meet with you one-on-one and help you determine where and how to get started. She'll most likely also touch base on some estate transition ideas, financing ideas, business growth or startup ideas, and many other things she has experience with from helping thousands of farmers and ranchers like you. So go to farmingwithoutthebank.com to get the book today and subscribe to the Farming Without the Bank podcast. So the profit is generated through animals that are able to perform in their environment, and also you're doing some of the grazing things that come along with it. I'm guessing as far as Johann Zeitzman's influence is concerned.
Yes, let's assume the worst model is set stocking, and the most common model 100 years ago. Now then, we get into Jim Garish and rotational grazing, and that's really what we do. But the ideal is if you're able to do strip grazing. The problem, we've got a lot of woods, and the follow-up is water, and the ranch is 12 and a half miles, and so on. And we're not fully stocked right now. But the ideal is to get to strip grazing.
Yep.
That's the highest possible stocking rate.
Sure.
And the highest possible profit once you get there.
My son and I have been watching a course from Jim Elizondo on that total grazing and some of those things. So starting to get some of those pieces put together. Very interesting. Really, like you said, the water becomes the limitation, which it is in every grazing system. But yeah, it is a incredibly interesting model. So I'd like to transition a little bit and talk about the money side of it, because you said that you were primarily a businessman, and yay for that. We're all about that on the Working Cows podcast. That's, as I've continued to mature in this podcasting journey, been recognizing more and more the business side of it is the most important side of it. We've got to get that right. If we have a good grazing plan with a bad gross margin, all that makes us able to do is go broke faster, right? And so I'd like to hear your thoughts on a little bit on the money side of it and what you're doing with the profit and how you're using it and investing it and some of those things.
Well, there's two issues. One is cash flow, and without cash flow, you're dead. And if mommy cries that there's not enough money in the account, that's a cash flow problem. Now, having said that, separate is wealth building, and that is you have a crop of calves, your wealth just went up. Now, you don't have the money for it until they're sold in some way. You have a choice of how we're going to sell it. Are we going to produce something which we dump in the sale barn, or something that sells at a premium? And once it's sold, we had a cost in getting it there. I don't mean in trucking, but rather its entire life up until the time it's sold. And we want animals. I want all as close to all females as we can get. Of course, we need bulls, but and we sell bulls, but the minimum number of bulls it takes to get the cows bred, and everything else is about females. With the idea that a young female, assume they're eating 3% of their body weight, she gets bred at 600 pounds with a mature weight of 11. Well, she's going to be gaining. And she gets bred at 600. She's going to calve a year later. So she gained and calved. A steer is going to gain. He's going to gain a little better. Not much better, but a little better. But if you take that calf or that young female with the calf at her side and combine the gain of those two, they'll outperform the steer all day. Now, then the cow is going to produce or consume 3% of her body weight. So 3% of 1,100 is a mature cow. She's going to calve, only calve. Now, at 5, she's going to also begin to depreciate. Meanwhile, that young female is appreciating and dumping calves along the way. So we keep all the heifers. If somebody calls and says, I'd like to buy 10 heifers, I'd say, gosh, thank you for the call, but we don't sell heifers. We sell steers, or you can buy cow-calf pairs. That is a bred cow, calf its side. We do sell those. And if they buy 4, there's 2 bull calves, 2 heifer calves, but that's the only way a heifer leaves here. And by the way, a nuance is that's an outlet for the older animals. Now, I don't mean necessarily old cows, but cows that are 5 to 8 years old, that's fine. Calf at side and bred back and reliable, no problems. And east of the Mississippi, the average herd is 18 head. So it's not, these aren't big herds. And the majority of people have off-farm jobs and so on, and they can't have calving problems. Many don't have working facilities and so on. So they just need low maintenance, easy keeping cows that calve with no problems, etc. And that's the model that sells. Sure. And interestingly, probably half of our cattle go to Amish, and they don't care about registration papers either.
Yeah, for sure. So you said we'd like to have all the heifers we could get. That reminds me of the Nature Plus One portion of the Ranching for Profit school, that, if you had a herd that had been left alone for, I don't know how many decades or centuries they say, but say 100 years, and you dropped somebody in there, what would the population be? Well, it would be 50% cows, 50% bulls. And they say, now let's just change one thing about that. What would you change? And the right answer, or the answer that usually comes up, is the bull to cow ratio, right? And you get rid of as many bulls as you can and still get the cows bred, and that's a good way to make things better.
Yes, and most cattlemen have too many bulls The bulls can breed more cows than most think. That is, a yearling bull. By the way, we don't sell yearling bulls at all because they're not ready if they're developed on just grass. Some of the sellers of bulls that are able to sell yearlings, they're not on just grass. They're on soy hulls, or they're jazzed up on haylage, or something else is going on there for them to be ready as yearlings. So consequently, we sell just twos. And the twos can take care of up to 40 cows, and threes and fours and older, 60 is the number we use. And then if you're adamant about tight calving, then that matters quite a bit. If you're a little more laxed on it, leave the bulls in a little longer, make sure everything's bred, and that cow, even if she's late, she can catch up. They're pregnant for 9 months. There's a 3-month window where they can recapture that late time if they were late, and sometimes they were late because of the bull, because there was a fire, there was a drought. It's not a game of perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and then I think that I'd like to just return to that kind of the paradigm you laid out earlier, cash flow and wealth building. And I think maybe cash flow is obvious, but if there's anything that is pivotal that you think gets missed in these conversations, I'd love to hear about that. And then I'd like to move on to wealth building a little bit.
Well, our costs are lower than anybody I know of. And that's a product of being close to the 38th parallel, where it's possible to go year-round with no hay. A product of the genetic combination of Oldie, Pine Bank, and Y, producing efficient cattle that are many, many generations into that type. Culling everything that's open, getting rid of the older cattle. And by the way, we've got a restaurant and butcher shop, and opening up to the idea also of harvesting for meat and steaks and so on, cutting older cattle. And you lose a little tenderness, but you can recapture it by simply hanging them longer. So all kinds of things that are opposite the industry.
Yeah. And there are limitations, right, on what you can turn into a certain kind of steak, right? Depending on the age.
Well, at 30 months, then their backbone has to come out. Having said that, if you're selling it to individuals, they can keep it in as long as they own it prior to butcher, and they can own it and it be on your farm. So that bone can be in if you use it for yourself. Now, if it goes to a restaurant or store, then the backbone has to come out. Now, you lose a little bit of middle meats, but keep in mind, if the animal is older, that carcass is also bigger.
Right. And I think you and I are on the same page that the 30-month deal is arbitrary and in relation to things that were problems created by the USDA. And that's another podcast that we don't have to discuss right now.
Yeah, the USDA, who's in bed with the packers who want the grass-finished people to have a harder time, frankly.
Right. Yeah. Because omega-6 fatty acids are good for you, and we want, or omega-3s are good. We want to get rid of the ones that are good for you.
Yes. In Europe, they want the oldest cow they can get because the flavor is greatest. In America, we hang them 4, 5, 6 days. Hanging them 3 weeks or a month condenses the flavor even more, and tenderness, increases the tenderness.
Sure. So the illustration that you gave in relation to wealth building is the cow, or the heifer she's going to gain and produce progeny. Can you just talk to me a little bit more about your philosophy of wealth building and some of the things that you're doing to continue to contribute to that on your operation?
Well, the big deal is the cattle are the product of the forage. The forage grows on the land, so the land is our biggest expense. So what can we do with it? So the cattle are one thing. There can be timber, and I'm a big proponent of silvoculture, that is, having trees in the pasture. Now, what kind of trees? Trees of value, and they can have value two ways: for wood, of course, but more importantly, for more forage production. That is, we plant pear, apple, persimmon, and osage trees, and we just added peach this year. Well, the cattle and wildlife love the leaves. If they can reach the leaf, it's gone. And then they all drop fruit, and we use a variety of different trees because they drop their fruit at different times, and then add an oak to that also, with the wildlife in mind. Speaking of wildlife, we've got a hunting operation. About 50 hunters a year come in at $4,000 a pop, whitetail deer hunting and turkey hunting. That is right on top of the land that we run the cattle on. In addition, we've got gas and oil going on here. And the benefit of the gas and oil is we actually sell the gas and oil rights as opposed to leasing it. And so you get one chunk of money. And that has a lot to do with how we were able to build this size ranch. That is, sell the gas and oil, which is considered real estate, sell it into a 1031 exchange. So the revenue for the gas and oil goes into an entity called a 1031 exchange. And then you buy a bit more land tax-free. That is, we sold it. We sold the gas and oil. We still have the surface. Now we buy more surface and did not pay any tax on the gain.
Yep. This is the conversation about capitalizing and concessionizing, right? And we're capitalizing what's under the ground, and
that's right.
And we're concessionizing what's on top of it with hunting and fruit trees and these kinds of things.
Yes, and then in addition, we've signed an agreement for solar, and the solar company will put the solar panels 9 feet in the air, so we can still graze. Put spacing in between the panels, so as the sun moves across the sky, there's still sun getting into to the plants that are underneath the panels. Having said that, the way that works is they sign an option to lease, and then they pay you each year, and it takes forever to get the permits to actually put the panels up and build the infrastructure to as an outlet for the whatever energy they capture. So in short, we simply get paid for the option of lease each year, and they have yet to put anything here. That's example on this CO2 stuff. We sold 1 acre that is an option to sell it with big money once they get the permits. For all the CO2, they can pump 10,000 feet in the ground underneath. So you're getting revenue from each layer. The trees are above the ground. Solar panels are above the ground. Gas and oil 7,000 feet down. CO2 is 10,000 feet down. The cattle are on the ground.
Taking advantage of every layer.
Yes, and then let me add also that we've got 160 acres of in the form of 14 lakes and 10 ponds, and with some streams, by the way, and the streams flowing never freeze. Number one. Number two is in those lakes, we stock them with 4,400 paddlefish. And paddlefish is it's almost a catfish-like fish, no bones, grows to 80 pounds. You buy them when they're 4 years old. Keep them until at least 10, but they'll live to be 55. And at 80 pounds, you can harvest them for meat, and they'll have about 40% production in meat. But here's the key. The females in the spring have up to 9 pounds of caviar, which sells on Amazon right now for between $30 and $50 per ounce. I didn't say pound, ounce.
Yeah, that'll work.
So, yeah, so an acre of lake costs the same as an acre of land, but doesn't produce grass. Now it does. It produces fish and their product.
What is the key to realizing all of this potential? I mean, just think about the neighborhood that you live in, and for me, you're in a high rainfall environment. You're in a place that has higher parasite load. You're in a place that probably is subject to some issues of having cattle on wet pastures. So there's probably, I could keep making excuses for applying parasiticides. I could keep making excuses for feeding cattle for 6 months out of the year. I could, but then flip that on its head. We don't feed any hay. We're not doing any of the parasiticides, insecticides, those kinds of things. We're capitalizing and concessionizing every layer of every acre, including the water. So I mean, it's just a totally different mindset from the other paradigm. So what's the key to seeing those opportunities?
Well, it's being open to it, and the trick is most people that have a ranch got to start in some way. They inherited it. They had another business, which is in my case, and that other business permitted me to borrow money to buy land. That land, because I owned it, I also owned the gas and oil, which didn't have value at the time, and I didn't buy it for the gas and oil. That came out of nowhere. Where'd the solar stuff come from? Where'd the CO2? The fish have always been around. Somebody just had to think through how do we make some money doing it. If we're going to plant timber, I'm 61 now. I don't much care about what's going to happen 50 years from now because I won't be here. But in 5 years, those fruit trees will be producing more forage for more wildlife, for the cattle.
Yeah.
It's a whole nother layer of forage.
Right.
And as long as and those trees, by the way, we plant, you can't plant them too densely, 30 feet apart or so. That way, as the sun moves, the grass underneath the tree is still getting sun. And keep in mind, the cattle and wildlife are keeping the lower part of the tree trimmed because they like the leaves. They're palatable.
Right. And probably doing something for them in the way of reducing the parasite load and some of those other things.
Yes, and if cattle, they have to have the ability to thrive with a reasonable worm load. And what did everybody do 150 years ago before we showed up and messed everything up? A great study. There was a show called Living on the Edge, I don't particularly care for the show, but they live on the Aleutian Islands. And one particular island, this is beautiful because you don't have to have a fence if you live on an island. There's 10,000 some cattle, and those cattle are the product of ships that wrecked, and the cattle were able to make it to the island. Now, there's a high population of bears, grizzly bears, and if any cow or calf is not in good shape, it's dead. If that female is not calving ease, she's dead. If they can't winter well, that is, if they aren't easy fleshing. By the way, living in winter on seaweed when the tide goes out, they're dead. And what kind of cow is produced over a couple hundred generations? It's calving ease, moderate size, super easy fleshing, athletic, etc. It's a whale of a lesson. And that's a lesson the Lord has given us.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Ranching on what nature provides, ranching on what God provides, is going to end up producing an animal that like he designed it,
Yes. And then we couldn't mess it up more. And in fact, I wrote an article. It's called Elimination Considerations. And nobody will publish it because it is communicating how not to buy every advertisement which pays for their magazine.
Yeah, right. Yep. That's Steve Campbell always says, caveat emptor, buyer beware, right? You gotta, they're trying to sell you something. And maybe if we just started to try and figure out how many of these animals would survive without all the things they're trying to sell us, we would end up with better animals.
Yes, over some time and generations, which is why stacking generations from whatever model you've chosen. If it's performance, they need to be stacked in performance for 4-H animals and so on.
Yeah.
If it's longhorns, it's a different subject. If it's low input beef production, that's what we do.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the understanding ag compounding and cascading effects. You can make really good things a lot better really fast by stacking those compounding and cascading effects, but the opposite is true as well. You can make bad things really bad really fast by stacking compounding and cascading effects. So
one other nuance here, and that is in a low input model, and winter especially as a tool, that permits us to identify who's a performer here and who's not. Why is this cow that just went through winter in good flesh and literally could go to the butcher shop in January on just winter dry feed in Ohio, and standing next to her is another cow that is in poor flesh? Same genetics, same management, same feed. Why is that? I don't know, but I know this one's in the bottom half now, and she'll go down the road. Mm. And if we didn't have that winter pressure, we would not have identified them. If we fed hay and feed, they both would have looked good. Yep. And they both would have had calves. But winter is a tool and pressure is a tool.
Very good. Well, James, I appreciate your time. We're going to have a link in the show notes page for today to the website, ohiolandandcattle.com. Also a link to the article that you mentioned. And it'll be in the show notes page for today. And really appreciate your time. Anything else that you would like me to share or direction you'd like me to point people?
Nope, I think we're all set.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today, James.
Thank you.
Very good stuff with James. Really appreciate the way he thinks about just making use of every acre, including the water. Pretty fascinating operation he's got going on there, and lots to think about in the capitalizing versus concessionizing conversation, and making use of all of the opportunities that exist on your ranch. Looking forward to next week on the Working Cows podcast. We're going to be joined by Rusty Williamson from Williamson Land and Cattle. And Rusty's got an interesting job title. They call him the visionary there. And we're going to talk to him about what that means and how he sees that informing his day-to-day role on the operation. So we'll see you again real soon with another episode of the Working Cows podcast.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.